Ediciones Kukulcán. Transformando la educación, inspirando el futuro.
Hello. Do you ever get confused when talking about advice, future plans, or making requests in English? Well, don't worry. Today, we're going to break down some modal verbs that will help you sound fluent and confident in English. Let's dive into should, ought to, will, and would. First up, should and ought to. These two modal verbs are used to give advice, recommendations, and express expectations. Let's start with should. Should is super useful when you want to give advice or make suggestions. Affirmative form, subject plus should plus verb. Here's how we use it. You should study for the test. The negative form of should is shouldn't. You shouldn't carry too much money. And if you want to ask a question, just use should plus subject plus verb plus complement. Like this, should you try the food? Now, let's talk about ought to. Ought to is similar to should, but it's often used when you're expressing an opinion or saying something is probable. Affirmative form, subject plus ought to plus verb. Like, I ought to call my parents. The negative form of ought to is ought not to or oughtn't to, but it's less common. You oughtn't to skip your studies. And for asking questions, ought plus subject plus to plus verb? Like, ought you to be studying now? Next up, will. You probably already know this one. Will is used for things that are going to happen in the future. For example, I will go to the movies tomorrow. Affirmative form, subject plus will plus verb. Negative form, subject plus will not, won't, plus verb. Questions with will plus subject plus verb? Like, will you join the study group? Finally, would. Would is the past tense of will, but it's also used for hypothetical situations and polite requests. Like, if I were you, I would study harder. Affirmative form, subject plus would plus verb. Negative form, subject plus would not, wouldn't, plus verb. And to ask a question, would plus subject plus verb? Like, would you like to study with me? Now you're ready to use these modal verbs like a pro. See you in the next video.